Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be talking about examining Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho. This is a chat room that calls itself a discernment ministry, and this is 40 losers against Doug Wilson. And we're going to talk about how this is a textbook example of how not to do discernment ministry. So, before we dive into this topic, don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel. I just want to do a quick note disclaimer. Evangelical Dark Web is, a discernment ministry mainly focused on news gathering and commentary for the church, equipping the saints for spiritual warfare. I have no personal agenda for or against individuals. That being said, Doug Wilson has been in the news a lot lately. And sometimes that happens where one person is the focus of, several times a month. And Doug Wilson is just having one of those months. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer. Let's dive into it. This is a Twitter post by examining Doug Wilson, exposing Moscow, these creeps, 40 losers, as I call them. And this is what they say about themselves. Who we are. We are a research group that grew out of a small think tank researching controversial Moscow, Idaho pastor Doug Wilson and his impact on the Reformed community. So part of the reason why I'm doing this is because they kind of came after me because they were butthurt about my coverage of the Costi Hinn story. They were butthurt about that, and they insist that they're theologically conservative, and it just does not check out. Doesn't check out. And we're going to talk about why it doesn't check out. But already, I want to point out that this group has a flaw in its premise, and I am just weary of any group that's really against a person, or even a single church. I'm weary against that. Even if it's something like Hillsong Watch, which, that was a ministry that was only for Brian Houston and Hillsong Church. Yes, they came out with some good stuff over the years, but largely the flawed premise in the ministry was that it's focusing on one person, not ideas that people hold to or a larger movement in and of itself. I think there's a flaw that comes out of focusing on one person because you elevate that person beyond what they actually are. So I just think that's a bad way to approach this type of work, this type of ministry. I think that's a flawed way to do it. So I think examining Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho, already off to a bad start because their premise of a ministry is fundamentally flawed. We are now 40-ish in number and have the oversight of 3 confessionally reformed pastors. This is a chat room, a Discord server, a Facebook group that has 40 people, and as we will learn later, none of them expose their names. They don't name themselves. So, despite the fact that 3 of them are pastors, or at least 3 of the people in charge are pastors, which is meaningless in today's day and age because they could just be liberal hacks. But yeah, they're pastors, so we should listen to them, right? No. This, again, 40 losers who don't want to come out of the light, of the darkness, and be in the light doing what they do. They want to hide behind the keyboard and the computer screen. They don't put themselves out there. I put myself out there. Most of my competitors put themselves out there. At the moment, the only person I can think of that doesn't put themselves out there, who's very relevant, to me at least, is Woke Preacher Clips. But Woke Preacher Clips is not devoted to one individual pastor, one individual church. If anything, Woke Preacher Clips is like a Grabian source. If you're in conservative media, you probably know that reference. They're like that, and largely they get tips. And it's like Libs of TikTok. That might be a more relevant example. Except not as much of a a career, so to speak. Because Libs of TikTok, that lady made money. But anyway, most other people name themselves. And they're pretty open about it. Our theological adherents, the Westminster and Heidelberg Catechisms, the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, the Athanasian Creed, the Westminster Confession of Faith, the Belgic Confession, and the Canons of Dort. Now, this is such a fig leaf, and again, I've done this for a while, and I see right through this nonsense. I even tweeted at them that, adhering to historical Christian creeds is what every single liberal, so it seems, does in evangelicalism. They always appeal to a historic creed to cover up their contemporary liberalness. So there are a ton of examples of this. And by the way, the Apostles' Creed claims that Jesus went to hell. I don't believe that. I think that's incorrect. And that's not what the Apostles' Creed originally stated. If you want to look at textual evidence that was added to the Apostles' Creed, and that's an inerrant addition to the Apostles' Creed, but that's neither here nor there. That's a digression. But the Westminster Confession of Faith, let's just use that as an example. How many people in Revoice, because that largely started out in the Presbyterian Church, despite the fact that Nate Collins has a Southern Baptist education, how many people in Revoice say that they adhere to the Westminster Confession of Faith or the Nicene Creed? They use this as fig leaves for the fact that they are peddling modern-day liberalism, modern-day heresy into the church. They use that as a fig leaf, a cover. And we see right through that. We also see that in the Southern Baptist Convention. How many egalitarians use the Baptist Faith and Message 2000 to say that we're not really liberal? We actually believe in complementarianism or patriarchy. And then Rick Warren goes and ordains female pastors, and they don't kick him out of the church because they don't know what a pastor is. They just appealed to a document, the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, to uphold and peddle liberalism in the church today. We see this pattern all the time. But will these same people sign the Chicago Statement on Inerrancy, or the Frankfurt Declaration, which came out last month, or the Dallas Statement on Social Justice and the Gospel? Or, will they sign even the Nashville Statement, which is so basic? So basic. But, these people will appeal to the Nicene Creed because they figure you haven't read it, or the Athanasian Creed because they figure you haven't read it, or the Belgic Confession because they want to be confessional and they want to be snooty about it. But they'll nonetheless peddle liberalism in the church. The purpose: to post publicly available documentation that demonstrates the concerns with Doug Wilson and his growing influence. His influence often destroys friendships, families, churches, and communities. This is such a effeminate motivation, and that is division. So you see a large emphasis on unity because they explain what the problem with Doug Wilson is. It destroys these things. Well, Jesus said that he comes to destroy these things. He comes to set father against son, husband against wife, brother against brother. He comes to set these things. He's guilty of these things too. Our Savior is guilty of what they accuse Doug Wilson of, because they're not accusing Doug Wilson of a particular heresy here. They're not accusing him of an agenda here. They're accusing him of division, but is he rightly dividing or wrongly dividing? I don't have to be a Doug Wilson bro to point out this error, the error in their purpose and how pitifully worded this is. Why anonymity? I'm bad with words tonight. Doug Wilson's followers have speculated about the members of our organization, and then based on that speculation have made personal threats to those they believe are part of our group. Pics or did not happen. I don't believe, I won't buy an online threat without a picture of evidence. I just don't. Too many people claim to be threatened online when really it is, statements of self-defense, like if you come after me, Second Amendment time, that is often considered an online threat by these people. And by these people, I mean people that claim to be receiving death threats. And they don't post pictures, but oftentimes, when I've seen people post pictures of death threats, it's just hate mail. It's not even a threat. So this just reeks of can't handle the heat in the kitchen. They can't handle this. They suck at this. They think social media is real life, and therefore they want to be cowards about it. So I don't buy that they've received personal threats. I don't buy it. Pics or didn't happen. That's my rule. That has always been my rule with these things. Because oftentimes when pics are shown, it wasn't actually a threat. We've therefore felt it was prudent to be anonymous in order to remain safe. The Apostle Paul kept himself safe from those who would harm him on several occasions, and cites 4 passages. Pretty bold comparison there, but they insist that they're not equating themselves. There's also the component of verbal harassment regularly employed by Doug Wilson's followers that, while not necessarily physically threatening, is mentally exhausting. And understand this, they mean for it to be. Our anonymity is also a mechanism whereby the documentation remains the focus. And there's some truth to that, but not really, because Doug Wilson is the focus, not really their documentation. This is an agenda against a particular person. This isn't woke preacher clips where the woke preacher clips that are put out are the focus of the content, because it's not a channel, it's not a Twitter account driven against a single person or a church. So again, very shady premise, shady conclusions, shady means. And it's highly effeminate. 40 people, none of them want to name themselves because they're afraid of being mentally exhausted by negative comments on social media. This is effeminate. You clearly are not cut out for discernment ministry. Quit while you're behind, because you suck at it. And if you look at their social media, it checks out that they're not conservative as they claim. They're politically and, I would argue, theologically liberal, or their following certainly is, and the people that they follow on social media are also theologically liberal. Please justify the Rachel Den Hollander or Julie Roy's, Michael Bird, Amy Bird follows on social media and claim that these people are theologically conservative. I don't buy it. Their followers certainly aren't. A lot of pronouns in bio, Ukraine flag type of nonsense. Largely, the theologies driving, examining Doug Wilson in Moscow, Idaho are, I would say, feminism, R2K theology. So Doug Wilson is not R2K. He's pretty far away from R2K. But R2K theology, which is one of the most dangerous theologies in the church that is under the umbrella of not heretical in the church today, is one of the largest drivers of this group. It's not federal vision. I don't believe that their objections are federal vision. I think that's a fig leaf, because that's an old issue that's highly confusing that they can use to drum up fear about Doug Wilson. And that's not to say that Doug Wilson doesn't have crazy views that are related to his past support of using federal vision as a label for his beliefs. But again, there is no coherent belief system with federal vision. You ask 30 federal vision proponents what federal vision is, and you're likely to get 30 different answers. And that's the problem with that ideology. There's no coherent definition. And Doug Wilson has abandoned the term because the term isn't helpful to articulating his actual theology, however errant or inerrant that it is. So they're pretty lazy in their attacks on Doug Wilson. Or, again, the attacks are largely based on the fact that Doug Wilson actually applies his theology in the real world and has quite an ambitious agenda, which is at times admirable, for sure, as it relates to carrying out his ministry here on earth. Their debate is really theological. I'm bad with words tonight. It's not as pure as they think it is. Yet they mask it because it's all about one person to them, Doug Wilson and his followers. This is not how you do discernment ministry. If you look at my competitors, a term that I will use in an endearing sense, John Harris, A.D. Robles, Protestia, Berean Babe, Violet, Capstone Report, Dissenter, they all are not anonymous. They all operate in the light. So these people are cockroaches. There's 40 of them, which is a nice nest of cockroaches. And they hide behind historical confessions because I bet if you did a background check of the 40 people, you'll find some liberal Fruit Loops in that mix. I bet it, because you see it in their following, you see it in their their followers. You see both. You see it in both. They're liberals, and they try to mask that. So these people are losers, and that is how not to do discernment online. That's all I got to say about that. My name is Ray. This is the Evangelical Dark Web. If you like this kind of content, also subscribe to the channel if you are new. Have a blessed day. Check out evangelicaldarkweb.org, and I will catch you on the next one.